All right, we are on to part 4, the final part of this series called Pioneer Connection, where we are learning how to connect to one of our pioneer ancestors. Maybe it's a Mormon pioneer, or maybe it's just someone in our family tree that we feel are a pioneer or someone that helped pave the way for us and our life today. So I have been learning about my 4th great-grandmother, Nancy Naomi Alexander Tracy. And I have read her biography and looked through memories and sources that are on Family Search for her. And I have learned quite a bit about her. Now, I know that we can't find out everything about our ancestors. We don't have a play-by-play of their life. Even the records that are there, we don't know if they're completely accurate, especially biographies and things like that. It all depends on someone's perspective of how reality was. But today, for this part 4, we are going to kind of think about who this ancestor actually was. So if you print off the worksheet, you can look through the questions there that help you kind of think about who this person was, what they might have been like as you're reading stories and learning information about them. Maybe you don't have stories, maybe you just have records of where they lived or how old they were when certain things happened in their lives. We can look at those things and think about what type of person they might have been. So some of the questions are like, what traits and characteristics did they have, or might they have had? Maybe we don't know for sure. But as I read about my ancestor, about how some of the stories of what she had to go through as a Mormon pioneer, I know that she had great faith. One of the stories is when they were living in Nauvoo, her husband was called as a missionary to New York, and he was supposed to go back there and teach. He wanted to go back and teach his own parents and his own siblings that did not join the church. And Nancy wanted to go with him, and so they asked the elders if that was okay, and they were granted permission to go. So their whole family traveled back to New York from Nauvoo to teach their family. And shortly after they arrived, just 2 weeks after they arrived in June of 1844, they got word that Joseph Smith and Hiram had been martyred, that they had been killed by a mob in the Carthage jail. And this was so hard for them to hear and so sad. They stayed there in New York for almost a year, and then they went back to Nauvoo. And I just think if I was in that situation, if I had sacrificed so much for this church and then the leaders were killed, would I have gone back? Would I have kept going? But Nancy and her husband did, and they endured lots more trials as they traveled to the Salt Lake Valley. So I just think of that. What type of traits would a person have to have in order to endure that, in order to keep going? Resilience, grit, resourcefulness, all of these things were traits that I believe that Nancy had. Maybe what were some of their strengths? She was able to see the good, able to keep going, able to have the positive, able to figure things out when things didn't go quite as planned. She was able to find her own answers with that mission call. She felt that she should go with her husband, and they figured it out and made it happen. Maybe what were some of their weaknesses? Now, I think this is kind of a hard question for us to answer sometimes, especially Mormon pioneer ancestors are kind of up on this pedestal of doing no wrong, but we know that they were also human. Okay, there was things that happened that maybe weren't their best qualities, and so we can take a look at the information there and think, maybe what were some of their weaknesses that they had, and think about that, and think about if those weaknesses have continued through the generations, and then how we can help deal with those in our own current time. Reading about Nancy's second husband, so after her first husband died, she married her husband's younger brother, and this was his third wife, his third marriage, so he was a polygamist. And there's records in the memories that his second wife, Fanny, was not a fan of Nancy, and eventually ended up divorcing this Horace Tracy, which is Nancy's second husband, apparently because of Nancy. And so who knows what traits or what things happened that might have caused that. Maybe Nancy was a little bit overbearing. Maybe she was a little too much for this wife named Fanny. So we don't know for sure, but there might have been some weaknesses there, and that is okay because we are all human and we all have weaknesses as well. You can also think about what similarities or what differences do we have with this ancestor. Okay, maybe we also have great faith. Maybe we don't. Maybe there's some huge differences, but we can take a look at that. And as we think about those traits as they relate to ourselves, that kind of helps us to connect more to this individual. Okay, and then lastly, think about something that you want to share with someone, or a story or facts that you want to remember, and write that down on the worksheet. There's a few stories that I wanted to remember. One of the stories were that, so Nancy was married to Moses Tracy, and they were living in far west Missouri. This was when things were really hard. There was mobs and even government officials that did not enjoy having the Mormons living there. So there was extermination orders, and they were driven out. But in far west, there was a battle at Crooked River, and Nancy's husband, Moses, fought in that battle against these mobs. They tried to reason with them, and that was not working, so they had to go fight to protect themselves. And after this battle took place, there was many people that died, and the government, the mobs, they were not happy about this, so they wanted to arrest these people that had participated in this battle. So Moses was in hiding. He was hiding and could not go home. There's 3 guards set up at Nancy's home. She was there with her 3 children, one just 3 weeks old, and she was sick and feverish and did not have much food in their house, but she couldn't leave. A neighbor somehow got her out and took them to his home where they were taken care of. But just knowing that story, I know of the great faith that she must have had and resilience in that situation. So think about the stories that you've learned about the ancestor that you have been learning about throughout this whole process. Maybe you don't have stories like I do, but maybe you can look at the dates and when things happen in their lives. Maybe they left their home country when they were young, and maybe they were alone. Maybe they didn't know the language of where they came to. Maybe they had family members who passed away, and we can think about how those things might have affected them. So for this part, we are just kind of diving into the idea of who this person was and how we can connect to them. I encourage you to share a photo of them if you have one, with a little story about them or some facts about them on social media. Please use the hashtag Pioneer Connection and tag me so that I can see them at Modern Genealogy. Thanks so much for participating in this Pioneer Connection mini course, and I look forward to seeing all of the stories and all of the photos that you have learned in this process.